Welcome into Campo and Joe. Anybody tuning in on Facebook Live, we certainly appreciate it. You know, we love when you're looking up at Facebook, you get a notification that we're coming on, and you stick around with us. We like to talk football. If you're part of our 1010XL podcast network or wherever you find us, we appreciate it. Coach, you're looking good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm very good, and it's a beautiful day out there today, and that's exciting.
Yeah, I'm telling you what, great weather. We've been treated to great weather.
Oh, yeah.
Now, you can catch Coach with us at least twice a week on XL Primetime. I'm on there Monday through Friday, noon to 3. Appreciate everybody listening to all the things that we throw out on 1010XL. We are going to talk Jaguar football, but I've got to start out with you going to spring training and seeing a Yankees game. This is where you go back to your Connecticut days, okay? You grew up as a Yankees fan.
I did. And, you have to understand, I'm all New York until I went to the Cowboys. I was a Giants fan until I went to the Cowboys, and my dog is named Tiki Barber. So, nice. But I've been a Yankee fan, and you know what? I root for the team that where I'm at. I mean, I rooted for the Rangers when I was in Texas, and I root obviously for the Jaguars now that I'm here, especially. But it was exciting. I know Aaron Boone. We've had an opportunity to spend some time together, and I saw him and had a good conversation. My son Tommy went with me, one of my boys. He got a chance to meet Aaron. Aaron was really good, and we saw two really good games. Judge 3 for 3 in the game he played, and 2 home runs, and we saw plenty of action. It's 7-4 and 11-7.
That's nice. So Aaron Judge, what a massive human being.
I'll tell you what, there were 2 guys that really impressed me, and I hadn't been to a Yankee game since Aaron was there. That's I don't go up to New York that much. Watching it on TV doesn't do any justice.
Right.
But Aaron, unbelievable size and physicalness and power, right? But in about the 4th inning, which I'm not used to seeing this guy in the 4th inning, Aroldis Chapman was on the mound for the Yankees in the second
you can do
game.
That in spring training, yeah.
And I just saw the big guy out there, and I said to my son Tommy, I said, man, that guy is huge, because I'm used to seeing Aroldis in the 9th inning, 10th inning, whatever. You talk about one massive human being.
Really big.
I was shocked. And then Tommy said, that's Aroldis Chapman. I looked and I said, oh my goodness. Facing that guy at 100 miles an hour. Oh my gosh. It's a chore, and he hides his pitches. It was fun to see him in person. I mean, it was just the game is different when you're in person than it is when you're watching it on TV.
It's cool to hear it, and we got to get to football, but you mentioned one thing, just being able to go to spring training because of everything that we went through from 2020 until this, and heck, we didn't even know they were going to play baseball, Coach. So there's been a lot that's happened in a short amount of time.
Yeah, and I think that it's a little bit going to be a little bit of a problem because, those minor league guys that are trying to make the ball club, it's the same thing as a walk-on almost coming into the NFL, and when you shorten the number of preseason games.
It's true.
The same thing's going to happen in baseball.
Limited opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, the veteran guys, they're going to go with a veteran guy if there's any question.
All right, now let's talk about a few things that are going on right now in our NFL world, and really the biggest thing, we got to get to kind of maybe Jaguar-centric topics. But the NFL owners meetings are going on, and the biggest piece of news in the National Football League is if you get the football in overtime, I deserve a right to get the football in overtime. You may score a touchdown, but I'm still going to have a chance to match you. So they finally did this. And it does seem, when we get to this point, Coach, it seems like, why did it take us so long? But before we deal with that, it's good that they did this rules change.
Well, the thing is, I think that there's a number of things in play. Number one, as a defensive coach, there's going to be some people that say, well, it's the defensive coach's responsibility, players to stop them and get an opportunity to have the football. But when you're in 2-minute situations, and really that's what it is, you need to score. The offense has an advantage because, they're going to do some things that they normally wouldn't do in those situations. You don't have as good a read on by down and distance what teams are going to do. So, that puts pressure on the defense. Now, the other thing is, from an offensive standpoint, I really didn't think about it that much until that game this year with the Kansas City and Buffalo. You got 2 quarterbacks that are really rolling,
Gunslingers.
and you didn't get to see the second one in that situation. And yet both teams finished in the same spot in the regular ball game. A lot of it to me is based on the reason it's lasted this long is they don't want TV doesn't want long ball games.
True.
And they would rather finish within that whatever it is, and I don't even know if it's 3 hours and 15 minutes or whatever it is.
That's it right there.
You know, they want to finish then. And I've also heard you say in the past that it's a safety issue as well, and that probably comes into play. You know, that's a hard-hitting operation for, you know, the 60-minute football game. To add to it very long is tough.
And the Players Association would argue, even though it is a small number of plays, they would argue the number of plays in one game, it starts to exponentially get worse the more hits you take.
And I can see that.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's there. But to me, fans rule what happens in sport. You know, when it really comes down to it. You know, they want to see a conclusion that's fair. And I think that's what, at least that happens with OT. Now, what the problem is going to be is the first time in a regular season game, let's say it's game number 17 or 18 or week 17 or 18.
Right.
If it keeps somebody from going to the playoffs because they're not using that rule and somebody just goes down and scores a touchdown and the game's over, they'll end up changing that rule too, because a number of fans will be upset with that situation.
You better believe it.
Why are they doing it here? Why are they not doing it both places?
And they already, the NFL, and they're not alone, but there are a lot of sports organizations that move at a snail's pace. The NCAA would be at the top of the list when it comes to moving at a snail's pace. Right. But you're correct that if you're going to do this when we want to call the postseason where you're deciding on who the champion is, you can't ignore how teams play in the regular season to get to the tournament to decide who the champion is. And I think this rule changed going back to the mid to late 90s, might have been 96, 97, when they went from if you score that touchdown, you end the game in overtime. They did that because of Peyton Manning. Yeah. And he was the star that was not given the opportunity to play. And they said, okay, well, we got to give both teams a shot at the football as long as one of them doesn't score a touchdown. Yeah. So that's the time from Peyton Manning, and I'll look it up, 96 or 97, until 2021.
Right.
Before they made the change. Yeah. And I believe in large part because the Players Association is saying, you know what, we're collecting money for our players. We don't need them in any more harm's way than necessary.
Yeah, and that's and I agree with you on that. No question. But you know, I still come down to the TV money being.
Oh, you are correct about that.
How important that is to everybody.
That is the absolute number one end all.
Right.
They want to think about what they've done in the time since you've been. You were a head coach with the Dallas Cowboys, a longtime assistant in the NFL, including right here in Jacksonville. But just take your evolution of time from the mid-'90s to the 2000s to the 2010s. They went from a 1 o'clock, everyone had a 1 o'clock, and then there were a few 4 o'clocks. Then it became a 1, a 1:05, and then a 4, a 4:05, a 4:15, a 4:25, because they want those games all spread out to give you, the viewer, the maximum.
And believe me, these spring leagues that haven't made it, one of them's going to make it.
Right.
It might be this year with the USFL coming back. Fans from the end of football to when it starts again, they want to see more football. And so that's where the money comes in, and one of these leagues is probably going to make it.
You know, this is a complete off the subject, but it's still on the subject with the NFL and talking about seeing as much football as they possibly can. Amazon is taking Thursday night, and you and I haven't really talked about this,
right?
But they're going to pay Kirk Herbstreit a buku amount of bucks. He just re-upped with ESPN and College Game Day. He may haul in $25 million or more between the two gigs, and I think Al Michaels is going to make something in the neighborhood of $10+ million, maybe $12 million a year to do that Thursday night game.
Right.
The amount of money that's out there in television is crazy.
Well, I mean, and that's in everything. I mean, you know, inflation, it goes beyond what they say it's going to go. I mean, when I was the defensive coordinator at Kansas.
Mm-hmm.
I was the third highest paid assistant coach in college football.
College football. Wow.
Okay.
That's pretty good.
And that was in 2000. My last year was 2014.
Mm-hmm.
Today, I wouldn't be in the top 50.
It's
maybe.
insane.
And that's money. That's, and that comes from revenue, whether it's from being at the game or TV money. And that's the biggest draw.
And that TV money is the biggest of all of that. You're talking about, if you look at a pie and you slice it up, that population inside the stadium pales in comparison, or money that's being made from inside the stadium pales in comparison to the television. All right, so at the owners' meeting, they make the decision on the overtime rule. And as you said, and I think you're absolutely 100%, they're going to, depending on how it goes, they're going to start talking about that next, make it official during the regular season. Doug Pederson also talking at the owners' meetings. And so we're taking a little bit of everything that he has to say as much as we possibly can right now. Well, a couple things came out of it. He said, just because you're signing Cam Robinson to a franchise tag right now doesn't mean you're not going to look for line in the draft. He said it's all about protecting 16, taking care of Trevor Lawrence. They're still working on a long-term deal for Cam. But what is he telling us? Is he making us, or making other NFL teams still think that they might be in the offensive line buying market, or they're thinking they may not be able to sign Cam to a long-term deal?
I think it's a little bit of both.
Okay.
I mean, the teams really don't want you to be 100% sure what you're going to do, because, there might be somebody that just will give up the house to get up to that number one pick. So you don't, it looks obvious, and it may be obvious. So it's a little bit of salesmanship, involved in it. But at the same time, he does have a very strong feeling about the offensive trenches. And, the hardest position, one of the hardest, the quarterback's the hardest.
Right, number one.
But the hardest, the next hardest, in my opinion, is finding a left tackle that is, got the ability to be a Tony Boselli. You just don't find them out there.
They're rare. Yeah.
There are a lot more athletes, for example, that can be a pass rusher, which is a very important aspect of the game.
Right.
Than there are big left tackles that can handle those guys that can run and rush the passer.
Yeah.
So, inside he may be looking at it and saying, "Hey, I can see taking him, playing him at guard, and then just letting it go." I don't know that it means anything as far as the long-term deal. I think they're going to try. I think they think Cam is good enough to continue to progress to be a long-term guy. I think they're legitimately going to try to get the long-term deal with him. But at the same time, the one thing by doing what they did allows them to open up more decisions. It opens up the playbook on the draft.
Right.
We'll live with him for a year. We'll see what happens, but we can now pick and choose what we're doing from there.
I think the thing that really stinks the most for Jaguar fans out there, for the Jaguars for that matter, is that there aren't enough really shiny diamonds at the top of the draft. That's the unfortunate part. Really good player in Evan Neal, maybe a good player in Aiden Hutchinson, maybe a good player in Kayvon Thibodeau. We're seeing other guys move up, like the safety Kyle Hamilton. But is he worth a pick that high in the draft? And the wide receiver talk, is it worth going? That's the only negative right now for them to attract somebody and maybe kind of double talk their way into getting someone to think they're going to do one thing instead of the other.
Yeah, I don't think there's a quarterback that somebody's going to come up and get. Not to get to that position. There may be some move in. I'll be surprised if there aren't 4 quarterbacks taken in the first round, which helps us, the Jags, with that 33rd pick. Very seldom you don't get 3 or 4 quarterbacks in that first round. So, it's a different year. I'm not 100% sure. I'd look at Aiden Hutchinson and I would say this is a safe, solid first pick of the draft, because more so because of his effort and his relentlessness and his short order ability, short order quickness, that type of thing. But he is probably not the best number one pick that I've seen over the years. So like you're saying, this is not a top of the draft heavy draft. There are a lot of guys down in there that you could take it a little bit later that have a lot of potential.
I think it's almost like you've got a dozen players at the top that all look like an excellent number 8 pick overall.
Yeah, and that's a good way to explain it.
There's a bunch of them like that.
And, I think you're going to see even the receiver position, there's going to be guys that are going to be outstanding in the league in the 20 to 25, 26, 27 range. So, now, that's just the way this draft is.
All right, now we're going to spend plenty of time breaking these guys down, but we'll probably just keep bringing it up every week, just at least a little bit of this. But we have this discussion on XL Primetime. And Matt Hayes argues that they're going to go for the cleanest player. And I get what he's saying. You don't want to take risk when you shouldn't take risk. This team can't afford to lay another egg at the top. They have taken Jalen Ramsey, Leonard Fournette. You can go all the way back to Justin Blackman in the top 5 I'm talking about. They've taken Blake Bortles. They've taken Dante Fowler. And so they have taken a lot of guys that either carried some risk with them, but others just didn't pan out. And so he's saying, let's take the least risky guy. Right. I still maintain you better take the most talented guy with the least risk. And
I think Pederson is in that mode. I think he's been in the league long enough to know that you got to, take talent. Yeah. And if I didn't think if I didn't think Hutchinson was worthy of the first pick, I would tell you that too. I think he's worthy of a decision being made between two guys to be that pick. It's not like you're taking somebody that should be the 8th pick with the first pick.
And then I can't get away from the very obvious. Sometimes it is moto. You got to be master of the obvious. They've tagged Cam. They signed Brandon Scherf. They've done some things to make sure their offensive line is okay. They spent a ton of money in the wide receiver market. They get a tight end on a 1-year deal. They've done all these things. They have not done a dang thing for that defensive pass rush. They got Josh Allen sitting on one side. They know he's good, could be great, but they better get somebody on the other side. So, I mean, it's simple off-season math for me.
And my looking at that pick, I would not be surprised if they didn't go with him. If there's somebody else that they covet that is more talented.
Walker.
Okay, I'm talking about maybe it's another position. I that wouldn't surprise me, but I will be shocked if they don't make that pick. That's how I look at it
and now. I agree.
With what you said with what they've done to this point.
So let's go one step further than that. You and I, we agree we would be shocked if they don't make that pick. Would you be as shocked if they were to pick an offensive lineman instead of that? In other words, they could go in a few other directions.
No, I would be surprised. Not shocked. I would be surprised. I mean, I'd be shocked, not surprised. Let me go back. It would not surprise me if they took the tackle, the offensive tackle. But I don't think it's going to happen. That's how I would look at it.
Because they haven't answered the tackle question long term, but it doesn't mean they won't. And I think what they're fighting with is they don't want to pay a guy that they view as above average, but not great in Cam Robinson, great money. I think that's what they're fighting off right now.
And I think that's where it's at. And I think at this particular time they're gonna try to get a long-term deal done, but it's probably not going to be what Cam might look at as being what he's worth. Listen, he may not. I don't know that he would have gotten, from what I've seen of him. I think he's okay, and I think he's still young to the point where he can improve. But he might not have gotten the 16 point whatever million he got in the market
anywhere else
now. The only thing he would have maybe gotten was security.
Right. A little more guaranteed money, a little more long term.
And security for some people is very important. And I think that will be part of whether or not Cam decides to do a long-term deal if they are trying to do it, which I believe they are. I think they think enough of him that they would do a long-term deal, but it's like you said with the money situation, it's going to be relative to what they feel is the right number, and it may not be his number.
Right, and they already, I don't know whether it's egg on their face or not, I don't mind that they went out and spent a bunch of money on Christian Kirk because there were only so many good pieces that they had to choose from, but they did something similar in paying Christian Kirk great wide receiver money for a good and potentially really good wide receiver.
Yeah, and I always look at it this way, you know, and I think I'm an example of what I'm talking about. I always took the longer contract with the Cowboys, for an example, okay? Because the security was more important to me than the extra $50,000 or something, because you make your money when you move.
Right.
You know, you don't make it a lot of times when you're with your own club.
It's true.
So I would take a 3-year contract, where some of the guys that I know would gamble, take the 1-year contract, and because they have enough confidence that they're going to get a better contract the next time around.
It's a quote,
and
bet
some
on
people
yourself.
would do that.
Yeah,
you know,
bet on
so
yourself.
whether or not they get the long-term contract, I think is partially that.
All right, so before we wrap up, tell me whether this is coach speak, whether this is saying all the right things at the right time, but just a couple of them. He said he would have liked to have kept DJ Chark, and my interpretation is that they probably looked and said, what are we willing to offer? And it probably wasn't going to be enough to keep him anyway. So he said he would have liked to have kept DJ Chark. What do you think he really meant when he was saying that?
Well, I think initially when he looked at it and he looked at the other free agent receivers that were out there, he might have seen some positiveness, you know, with what he had done early. But he would have liked to have kept him means it's doing two things. Number one, it's saying that it's keeping things a little bit under the veil, behind the veil, you know, on what he's doing. But it's also telling your team that we do value our guys. You know, to say that I'd like to have kept him, that looks better than saying, hey, we don't, you know, we wanted to get rid of him from the very beginning. We think we've got 2 or 3 other guys that are better. Yeah. You know, it gives you the feeling that he's looking out for us, our guys.
Yeah, I think that's a smart approach. I think you hit it on the head there. The other one is he's speaking positively about Travis Etienne maybe being available around OTA time, which would be the end of April, early May at the latest, I would think, as far as the OTA schedule goes. Right. So he's excited about the possibility of getting him on the field, and also excited about James Robinson around training camp time. Right. Is he crossing his fingers and selling that idea, or do you believe when he says something like that, there's some realness to it?
Oh, I think there's some realness to it, but I think he's crossing his fingers at the same time. You know, those were 2 significant injuries. You know, in today's medical world, if, you know, people are, he's not making that distinction on his own. He's talking to his medical people and the people that have dealt with them specifically. I don't know if it's Jacksonville doctors or I'm sure they got the best surgeons that they could. And so I think it's partially that, you know, that there's a comfortableness when you see other people that have responded, you know, positively from those injuries. And I think that's a combination of that.
All right, last one. Brandon Linder decides that he's going to retire. He was beaten up a little bit. He had multiple injuries. And if you go back over the last couple of years, we saw Shatley probably a little bit more than I think anyone would have expected. Right. And Shatley wasn't bad. He wasn't a liability.
Right, exactly.
So what did you think of Linder's decision, and what will they do going forward? Is Shatley the man?
Well, from what I understand, first of all, is that I don't know that he had the option to stay. From what I've heard,
explain that just a little bit.
Well, I think basically the meeting he had with the organization was, we may have to release you.
What do you want to do?
You make a decision on how you want to do it.
Right.
That's a possibility. Sure. And I've heard that. Okay. So from that standpoint, you know, he made the right decision. You know, he goes out on the positiveness and going forward. He did miss 22 games over the last 4 years. So I think in his mind, the injury situation, on the organization side and his side probably factored into the decision that this was the right time. So, I think that's part of it. I think I think they like Shatley. They made that decision very quickly with the notion that we may not get another guy.
Right.
And I think they felt comfortable with that decision. Now, will they be looking for something? That 33rd pick, if there's a center there, they very well could take a center there. Those are the things that they're making a decision on now. But the faster they get done, Chark is not here, Linder's retired, those kind of decisions. We've franchised Cam.
Right.
I'm getting good vibes on the Etienne and Robinson. That just makes it unclouds the picture on where they're going in the draft.
Yeah.
And so the faster that's done, the better chance they have to pick the people that they want and need in that situation.
Yeah, we'll look at that center in the draft coming up, but you're right. They've got answers now instead of questions.
Correct.
And I think that's a big, big thing.
Right.
You know what you do every week? You give us answers instead of questions.
I hope so.
Okay?
Yeah.
That's what you do.
Yeah,
all right? We appreciate it, Coach.
All right.
As
thanks.
always. Campo and Joe, we appreciate you guys tuning in. 1010XL Podcast Network on YouTube or wherever you find us, and we will talk to you next week.
Is Coach Campo Allen Iverson?
He's the answer.
He's the answer.
Chief just gave you another nickname. You are the answer.
The answer man.
That's right.
Dave AI Campo.
Yeah, there you go. All right, buddy.